So when I first started the sub-series of my reviews, there was one set of games in particular that I knew I wanted to talk about and really kind of inspired me to do Same Diff in the first place, since this is like the go-to game when it comes to this type of video. So during the 16-bit era, there was definitely a lot of licensed games and, well, most of them were pretty fucking crap. Though there are exceptions, and one of the biggest exceptions would probably make it onto a lot of people's top 10 or top 20 Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo games, with that game being Aladdin. Based on the hit animated movie, Aladdin was a pretty big success. Its animation was top-notch, it had a fun plot. Musically, I still think it's one of the best soundtracks to come out of that era of Disney animated films, and honestly, I'll still watch it from time to time. But Aladdin wasn't only a hit with the movie. In terms of games, both have been highly rated, and are considered must-haves for each system. In fact, Aladdin was the third best-selling game on the Genesis, second only to Sonic 1 and 2 with 4 million copies sold. For a third-party licensed game, that's pretty damn impressive. And the SNES version was Capcom's best-selling game for the system if you don't count Street Fighter 2 and its updated releases at 1.8 million. So it's fair to say Aladdin was the cream of the crop of its time when it came to licensed games. And due to its success and popularity, a debate on which one is better has been around for a long time, and will go on long after this video. So a little bit of history with me in these games, just to give a bit of a mindset of where I'm coming from. As far back as I can remember, the Genesis version is the one I had access to. I wouldn't say I grew up with it since I never actually owned it, I only ever borrowed it from my cousins Amy and Ryan, but I did have more experience with the Genesis version before recording and writing this review. The Super Nintendo version, on the other hand, I've known about it, but I've never touched it up until this episode. So I've come in fresh for this version, I've played through it about 5 or 6 times to make sure I've got a good feel for it, and I don't overlook or say something stupid. Now, some may feel I might have a bias towards the Genesis version due to nostalgia, but I'd like to think that I won't be letting anything slide. If there's bad game design, then I'll point it out, plain and simple. But let's get started. So I'm not really going to go deep into the story of Aladdin since both are just loose adaptations of the movie. All you need to know is that you play as Aladdin, a thief who has love at first sight with a princess. A villain named Jafar notices the boy's talents and decides to deceive him into acquiring the magic lamp. Antics ensue, and in the end you get back to Agrabah and face off against Jafar to save everyone. Some may feel that little summary feels half-assed, but that's pretty much what you're getting out of the cutscenes. SNES version is a bit more visually appealing, but in terms of reading, it definitely makes me feel like the game thinks I'm an idiot. The text feels basic is the best way to describe it, whereas on Genesis, you're not getting as many flashy images, but the text does feel a little bit more in-depth. One benefit that Capcom has over Virgin, while it's not much, the game has in-game cutscenes, which has a show-don't-tell approach which helps give the presentation a bit more polish. Genesis, get to the end of the stage and then it's immediately onto the level complete screen. Again, it's not much, but in terms of story presentation, it is a plus for the SNES. But that's pretty much where any similarities end, cause these two are very different games. So I'll start with Virgin's Genesis version, though I'll be jumping back and forth between both games. Aladdin is best described as an action platformer. You try to get from point A to point B while fending off enemies, collecting apples that can be used as a throwing weapon, and jewels that can be used to buy 3 lives or continues for the right price. Aladdin's main form of attack is a sword, which you can continuously swing. There's no real combo or alternates besides if you hold up while pushing the attack button, he'll do this weird attack back and forth slash, but nonetheless, it's still simple and not that far in depth. Also, most enemies will fall within 1 hit, unless they parry your slash, but generally that just leads to a couple more hits. In most cases, you'll emerge the victor with no hits if you can space them out a bit. But as I mentioned, Aladdin also has access to apples, and holy Christ, these things are deadly. I mean, I know an apple to the head would hurt, but I didn't think it would be lethal. Although it isn't guaranteed. Some enemies enjoy using throwing knives which can cut your apple right in half, and it's actually a really impressive attention to detail, which this version is oozing with when it comes to presentation. Alongside jewels, there's health pickups in the genie heads. The more of the genie heads you pick up, the more chances you get at some extra goodies in the bonus mode at the end of each stage. Holy hell, this is gonna be tough to say. There's also the Abu face which appears in some levels. Yeah, got it. Collect this and you'll play as Al's little buddy in a minigame where your goal is to survive the onslaught of obstacles for a chance to win some jewels and some free lives. To be fair, it is trial and error, but it is a nice distraction. And it's not like you lose a life or anything if you screw up, it just means you don't get extra goodies. Graphically, it can feel a little muddy in its color, but animation-wise, it's pretty superb in how fluid and lively everybody is. It's honestly almost as if they jumped out of the movie itself. Not a lot of games reached this level back in the day, and for a Genesis game, again, really impressive, especially when you compare it to its Capcom counterpart. Now, I'm not saying Aladdin on SNES is a bad looking game. Oh no, it's still a fine looking title that benefits from better colors. But it's no contest when it comes to its animation. Most enemies and objects only have about a few frames of animation for each of their movements, which gets the job done and again still looks nice. But on a system that's supposed to have superior hardware being shown up in this department, it's a little jarring, I will admit. Now, in terms of how Aladdin plays on SNES, it's still an action platformer with the goal being from getting from point A to point B, but how Aladdin controls is very different. This version tends to focus more on his acrobatics, which some will argue is more faithful to his character, since while as fun as it is to use a sword, it isn't accurate, so some people will use it as a knock against the game. I don't agree with that belief, but I at least understand it. But anyway, Aladdin can jump on his enemies, grab onto ledges, and swing from poles and other such objects to cross gaps and reach higher ledges. He also gets apples as throwing weapons in this game as well, but they aren't nearly as potent as their Genesis counterparts as they can only be used as stun enemies. Shortly as you go through levels, Aladdin can also find a parachute which allows him to glide and potentially cross over tricky platforming segments. As he does this, he'll still collect things like health and a scabbard that acts similar to the genie heads, just it's only one per level and you always get something, unlike Genesis where you can get multiple items, but could get robbed easily if you hit a Jafar face. You'll also collect jewels here too, but they function a little differently. As I mentioned earlier, in the Genesis version, jewels are used as a currency to buy free lives and continues from this seller. Capcom's Aladdin used jewels as the main collectible, similar to coins or rings, but they use it in a pretty creative way. Instead of granting an extra life when you collect the value of 100, Aladdin will be granted more health, which you can use to take an extra hit. At first, I thought this was a really awesome idea and really enjoyed the mechanic that Aladdin gets a bit stronger as you play, but then I soon realized a pretty glaring flaw in this design. Because while yes, it rewards the player for good gameplay, unfortunately it also punishes you for not being good or still learning the feel of the game. This isn't the only way to get more hearts, as there are heart pickups that'll increase your maximum health, but I've only ever found 2 of these, and even after beating a level, your health doesn't get regenerated. So the only way you're getting your health back up is with food or death, which honestly feels a little cheap to me. I mean, once I got a handle on the game and knew what I was doing, health was never really a problem, but that first playthrough, jeez man, it was rough. To me, they should have given the players a couple more of these heart items. Cause while yes, you're rewarded with more health for playing better, but what's the fucking point when once you get better, you're not taking many hits anyway, rendering the reward kinda pointless. Whereas a newcomer could actually use a couple extra hits so they can learn a bit better without having to see that discouraging game over screen a bunch of times. Unfortunately, I'd say it's one of this version's biggest problems. The game doesn't really explain things all that well. It actually takes a bit of getting used to. Aladdin, when he bounces off an enemy or object, he always gets pushed a little forward, which can throw players off at first. And his parachute, I mean, I didn't even know it was a parachute at first. I thought it was a map or something. And because of the bottomless pits this game likes to throw at you, a new player can be prone to dying more, and if you game over, then you lose the parachute and then have to get it again, which can make the parts a newcomer is struggling with all the harder because you don't have the safety net anymore until you get another one. This is why that first playthrough was a bit of a miserable one for me. Not knowing the ins and outs of all the mechanics made the game a bit of a struggle, but once I realized you could glide and stop feeling like an idiot for not realizing this stuff sooner, the game became a lot more fun.
I mean, hey, who would have thought playing games properly would lead to a better time, huh? Jesus Christ, I can't even do that right.
Thankfully though, Aladdin on Genesis doesn't have that problem. You're gonna learn everything you need to know about the game very quickly since he always starts out with a sword and apples right out of the gate. And his health is a set amount no matter what, so if you die, it's not because of a lack of reward is putting you at a disadvantage. Oh no, Aladdin on Genesis will gladly kill you in more ruthless ways, cause fuck me man, this version is definitely the harder game. Sure, I struggled a bit at first, but once I got a handle on things on the Super Nintendo version, and while I was starting to have a lot of fun with it, the game became really easy. Maybe a little too easy. I mean, you can finish the game well under half an hour. Due to it being a lot more platform-based, it became a situation where if I died, it was rarely due to enemies. Bottomless pits are usually where I met my demise because I missed time to jump or a swing. Genesis, on the other hand, is a lot more combat-focused than it is platforming, and you're gonna take more hits as the level goes on. Even on lower difficulties, I still cut it close sometimes. But level structure definitely plays a factor in the difficulty of these games as well. Aladdin on Super Nintendo only has 7 levels throughout the game, with each of them being broken up into segments, where the goal is usually get from point A to point B each time. A couple of times they'll change things up, like the 2 times you'll ride on a flying carpet, and one segment being an auto-scroller, but for the most part it's pretty traditional stuff. Virgin's levels though are all one big level with multiple checkpoints, and there are more of them with having a total of 10 when compared to the 7 on the Super Nintendo. Virgin also tried to add objectives to most of its levels. Not all of them, but majority have something that'll make things a little bit more interesting. So I figured it'd be a good idea to go through the levels and see how they compare, since for platformers, you're only as good as your level design. Both games start off in the streets of Agrabah, and both do their jobs pretty nicely. They're nothing too difficult, and it helps you build an understanding that lets you play around with the controls for a little bit without much consequence, as any good first level should. Also, props for the Genesis version using the Prince Ali theme. Actually, can I talk about the soundtrack for a minute? Now keep in mind, music is subjective, and I won't use it to judge whether a game is truly better or not, but I love the Genesis soundtrack. Having so many familiar tunes in that Genesis twang, it's one of the most nostalgic soundtracks for me in gaming. From the main theme song of the series, to the streets of Agrabah, to even to the more original tunes. They give off such a high energy that fits so well with the more action and combat focused gameplay, and I love it. But I was happily surprised at how good Capcom's soundtrack was too. It might not have as many original tunes from the movie, but it's still so upbeat and catchy, and oh, thank you. Thank you for managing to get the Genie's theme on this version too, cause both are phenomenal remixes. Sorry, I had to get that out of the way. It's so good. But anyway, there's actually a bit of a gap between levels as SNES Aladdin goes straight to the Cave of Wonders after the first level, whereas on Sega you'll be going through the desert looking for pieces of the scabbard. It's another fairly straightforward level that teaches you that levels will have little different objectives. After that, you'll come back to the Agrabah rooftops, having to collect more pieces of the scabbard. But to traverse the level this time, you'll have to collect flutes that'll summon magic ropes which will fly you to higher spots. A little more in-depth than the first two, but it's still pretty straightforward. If there's any knock against this stage, then I'd say there's two things. One, this is a little too similar to the first level. I get we're back in Agrabah, but outside of the flutes and the level layout and music, it's a copy and paste job which is disappointing visually. And along the way, you'll fight off against your first boss. And he's a fucking joke in issue 2 with this level. Like, look at this shit! That's honestly pretty embarrassing that I was able to just stun lock him like that and take him out so quickly. And unfortunately, outside of every version of Jafar, all the bosses in both games are absolute jokes and pushovers. Either you can make it where they can never get a hit on you or even attack, or their patterns are unbelievably easy to figure out. I know these are games that are supposed to be on the easier side, but still, I mean, come on, it's a boss. Bosses are supposed to be a little challenging, don't you think? But anyway, we're still exclusively on Genesis right now, and here we get to the dungeon, where there's not really an objective, it's just a really long level that focuses on a lot more platforming than it does combat with its Mega Man-like blocks and almost labyrinth-like design. And it's also where I started noticing this game was awfully weird about where they placed their checkpoints, like this one. Like seriously, did we really need a checkpoint that's literally 10 steps away from the exit at the end of the level? Feels a little overkill, don't you think? But then later on, the game decides to get pretty fucking stingy with its checkpoints where you might only have one or two, or none at all. Did you just run out of them? No, I'm honestly curious because it just doesn't make any fucking sense. But that's the first clue you might notice that Virgin's version might have more cracks in its design than you might think. But we finally make it to the Cave of Wonders, and hey, I can finally talk about Capcom's version again, holy shit. As the second level, it's not too long and there's not too many enemies besides bats and scorpions, but I felt they went a little too overboard with the bottomless pits in these segments. I probably died here more than I did in any level. They do try to change it up with these log and pulley sections, but it does feel like a bit of a drag having to wait here at this segment. Luckily, it's over before you know it, so it's more of a nitpick than anything else. Back on the Sega version, this is where the difficulty really starts to ramp up. The objective this time is to destroy these statues that open up the way forward. And you're gonna get hit quite a few times by these rocks and bats, which can be a problem since they blend in with the environment way too much. So I wouldn't be surprised if you lose a couple lives here. Also, you learned that Aladdin can't swim, so you gotta watch your footing at points. Definitely not a level you want to rush or else you're gonna be hurting. But oh my god, man, the next level can suck my dick. Every stupid flaw with this game is put on display here and it becomes pretty clear that Aladdin on Sega Genesis isn't as polished as its Capcom counterpart. What's the best way to make a frustrating level in Aladdin for Genesis? Oh, let's make it a high platforming section that has lava, insta-kill objects, trial and error, and hey, let's showcase how slippery and unresponsive Aladdin can be with his jumps at points. This level is easily the worst in either game. You will die, and you will die a lot. And I guarantee you, if you haven't seen that game over screen yet, then you're gonna see it here. I had the maximum amount of lives that you can have at one time, and I lost all of them on this level. And many times, in this exact same spot. What the motherfucker? Are you kidding me? Oh, off. What the hell? Oh, off. Like, I'm not a retard. I've been playing games for over 25 years. I know how to push the jump button.
And then when I finally got to it, this boulder can take you out in one hit, and it's like you have enough balls to include healing items when almost everything is an insta-kill. Oh, and these little lava pops that can disrupt your jump range and make you miss your mark, forcing you into the lava, which is just a bottomless pit. And I get to do the level from the very beginning, cause no, checkpoints would make too much goddamn sense in a level like this. Kiss my ass. SNES section is already better by default, even if it is an auto-scrolling level. This is better, and they even included a checkpoint! So what the hell happened here? This could have been a brick wall for people who rented this game back in the day. I have knowledge and I've been playing this game off and on for years, and I was still failing, where it looked like I never touched a controller in my life. Like, whatever. After we finally get past that fucking mess, we reach the magic carpet segment for both games. And both are about dodging debris, and if you get hit once, you fall off the carpet and die. In my opinion, the Genesis beats the SNES version hands down here. Capcom's version is a lot slower paced, and it goes by a lot quicker. It's literally only 40 seconds long. Plus, I don't like the fact that it forces you to the front like that all the time, since you're prone to messing up from the trial and error aspect, as you obviously won't know what's coming up ahead at first. It is a nice set piece to help break up the action for a bit, but compared to Virgin's version, it doesn't even compete. Here, you're being guided by Genie to dodge debris that's coming flying at you in 3 different heights, and your job is to dodge all of them. As time goes on, speed picks up and it becomes harder to dodge to the point where these almost become split-second decisions. It's fast-paced, exhilarating, it's a hell of a lot of fun, and is a great test of your reflexes. It's tough to beat for sure, but this is the best level in either game in my opinion, hands down. And even if you're not skilled enough, after 5 deaths, which you can recumulate since this level gives you the chance to have 3 lives pretty easily, it has mercy on you and immediately bumps you to the next level. So by doing that, this becomes more of a fun minigame instead of a potential brick wall like the last level was. Though why this level gets the mulligan and not the previous levels beyond me, but hey, it's something I guess. Next up is the Genie level for both, and well, we come back to frustrating segments for the Genesis version. Not that the entire level is horrible, but there are 3 sections that kill this level from being great in my opinion. Once again, this is purely a platforming section as there's no enemies or objects to hurt you whatsoever, and when it's being fun, the platforming can be really fun because you'll be bouncing all over the place. But then we get to this spot where you need to leapfrog these balloons to get across the gap, and it's finicky as hell, and if you mess up, it can lead to death by bottomless pit. Or how about this little beauty right at the end here, where Genie will flick you, and if you miss the other flicker, it's probably gonna lead you to fall into your death. Yeah, fuck you, game. But the biggest problem with this level to me is that there are points where it feels like you hit a dead end and you don't know where you have to go next. Because either A, the platforms haven't appeared yet, or B, the camera doesn't even show them. So you're forced to crouch to see what's underneath you, and then the camera will try to center on it. And unfortunately, the camera can be one of the game's biggest issues. It tries its damnedest to be dynamic and focus on what needs to be focused on. And while I appreciate that they try to get a dynamic camera working here, but it's a mess when it comes to this stuff. This is one of the only 2D games that I've played where it becomes mandatory to have to crouch to have the camera position itself properly. Other 2D platformer games have this feature too, but I've never needed to use it, you know? It's just to give you a better idea of what's around your surroundings. I mean, to its credit, at least you had the option to do this, where plenty of 8-bit and 16-bit games have that leap of faith that generally screws over the player, cause you know, you can't even move the camera. And really, it's only this level where it becomes a real issue, but it's still an issue and a pretty decent flaw of the game no matter how you look at it. This is definitely a level that Capcom has the advantage on. Both versions are purely about platforming, but on top of the game being a lot more stable, you know, it's kinda hard to compete when your game is more about platforming than combat, so it's no contest. And this, in my opinion, is the SNES version's best level. You can tell they had a lot of fun with all the platforming gimmicks. All the swinging, bouncing, climbing, all the while having that brilliant "You Have a Friend in Me" song playing. Honestly, it's easily one of the best levels between both games. The only sour spot on this level that I can really nitpick is this part where Genie will start producing these random objects so you can get across this path. It's not too hard to figure out, but it is random, or at least has random sets, which can be a bit of a pain trying to figure out what's next since it doesn't pop up until you've jumped. So it can feel a little cheap in my opinion. Not game breaking by any means, but enough for me to bring it up. But on to the next level, and this is pretty much where the games differ until you meet up with Jafar at the end. On Super Nintendo, we make a bit of a detour to this pyramid to find a boo who fell off the carpet, so you gotta go find him. And I'd say this is a pretty standard level. Much like level 1, there's some bottomless pits and a lot of platforming, and we also see the return of the guards here as enemies. The main gimmick here is that the flowing sand can push you off the ledges, so you gotta be careful. There's also these bats that can appear out of the sand at points, which they can feel cheap in my opinion, since they pop out of the sand in a way where I tend not to notice until it's too late. Nothing too strenuous, but it is still annoying. Then at the end, you'll be greeted by this boss who is just a fake out. You little fucking monkey. Next up is another carpet ride level that is reenacting the one scene from the movie. Though it's not considered a real level and is just a bonus level for a chance to collect more jewels and potentially grab an extra heart piece or two depending on how well you do. It's a weird take on a minigame, but it is a nice break nonetheless. And the novelty of the level is actually pretty cool.
Afterwards, you make it to the palace, or the palace's dungeon, I think, that transitions to the palace, I think. And I'd say this is probably the first time where I felt there was some actual challenge that wasn't tied to just bottomless pits. There's a shit ton of enemies, platforming is a lot more intricate, and is all around a decently challenging level for this otherwise simple game. I think the reason why I appreciate it as much as I do is because it relies on actual challenge from its environment, because there's no bottomless pits here. I mean, sure, there's pits that you can fall into that'll harm you, like the spiked ones or the section where the fire will rise, but I just wish we had more levels set up like this, because all around this is a great final level, and I didn't want it to end. But back on the Genesis side of things, the last two levels take place in the Sultan's Palace. Just one is calm and mellow besides the fact that a bunch of guards want you dead, and the other is the hell version of the level that is a bit more deadly. For the most part, these are pretty good levels. You don't have to deal with the bullshit stage 6 or 8 threw at you, as these levels are like the first 5, where they are designed well enough that you don't have to worry about the game's more looser control. Though, just be careful during the flying carpet sections here. It'll always take you to your destination, but you can jump off at any time, which can mess a player up where either you're redoing parts of the level, or you fall into the water, which is instant death since water is lava, you know. But other than that, all in all, a pretty good level. In between the two, you have a boss fight with Iago, and again, it's piss easy, but I will admit I do like this fight. Throwing apples at him and seeing him get pulverized by the wheel is another example of this game's quality animation for its sprites, plus it's a nice nod to the scene in the movie. Soon after that, we finally make it to the hell version of the palace, and it's easily the hardest level in the game that isn't a fucking mess. And while I do enjoy the challenge, it is a little disappointing that it's basically a palette swap of the previous level with different obstacles. I mean, I understand it fits with the plot since this is when Jafar fully takes over, but from a game standpoint, a palette swap can feel a little underwhelming, especially for a final level. But it does put your skills to the test and makes use of everything you learn, so that's what's most important. Also, at least there is a palette swap here. It's not like the third level where it just reuses elements from the first level and changes absolutely nothing in terms of visuals. So we're finally here. We've reached Jafar, and he's definitely the toughest fight in this game. But considering that, he's still pretty basic. All he does is try to pull you into him with a scepter to hurt you. And sometimes it doesn't matter how much you resist, sooner or later he's gonna collide with you. Just hit him a few times with your apples, and then you'll turn into a snake form, and this part can definitely be tricky, as he'll generally spam his flames, and the platforms on top will catch fire if you step on them now, so you gotta keep moving. Chances are you've probably died and lost your apples, so the game will keep respawning 4 at a time, so you can always manage to hit them. But once you've figured out the pattern and timing of his flames, the basicness of this fight will become its undoing, and you'll marathon both forms quickly. Jafar on the SNES version though is a hell of a lot more in depth. Both forms have different attacks and patterns instead of just spamming the exact same move over and over. That alone makes these fights the superior versions. In his first form, he'll try to electrocute you, summon enemies, or just flat out ram into you. It's a fun fight and a pretty decent challenge to figure out his pattern. His final form is also really cool and makes good use of the FX chip, or at least I think it does. It looks like an FX visual at least. Again, the goal is to bop him on the head enough times while avoiding the flames, his eggs, or just his attacks in general. But I do have to say, frame drop. Holy hell. Clearly this is a very ambitious final fight, but it might be a little too ambitious. Though, to its credit, you might be able to use a slowdown to better time a hit. But once you defeat him, you get the final cutscene, and then you'll get 1 of 2 credit sequences based on how many red jewels you acquire. If you get 50 or more, then you are a great player. Yay, spelling and translations! And great way to rob me of my accomplishment. Fucking hell. Oh, Jesus Christ. And there you have it. That's both versions of Aladdin, so what's the verdict? Honestly, I'm not sure because I'm really conflicted here. On one hand, the SNES version, while a bit shorter and simpler, is a much more polished game when it comes to pure gameplay, as there wasn't really any glitches or faulty design here. Sure, it took me a bit of getting used to since Aladdin's acrobatics are a bit different from the norm, but it's a solid game from start to finish and I had fun with it. I can easily see why people adore this title and why its reputation is so high. On the other hand though, Aladdin on Genesis felt a lot more ambitious. There's more levels, the quality in its animation is really impressive for a Sega game, and is all around a much more challenging and engaging experience thanks to its more combat-focused gameplay, which I had a lot more fun when it was doing it well. But the game isn't as solid from a technical standpoint, and when it gets bad, ooh, it's ugly. And I know that can't be overlooked since those problems could be a deal breaker. Thankfully, it's only 2 levels that really suffer from said problems, but faulty design is still faulty design. So I'm not sure. Do I pick the game that's fundamentally superior on a technical level even though I don't find it as fun or engaging? Or do I go with my enjoyment as a whole even if I wanted to snap my controller in half at points? I've never struggled on a decision like this as much as I have before when it comes to picking what I feel is the superior game. But as much as I may prefer the Genesis version on an enjoyment level, and feel it can reach higher points than Capcom's, I've gotta go with the Super Nintendo version as the winner because while yes, I might enjoy the Sega version for having higher potential, but Virgin's games stumbled too much to get there. Capcom in the end made a better quality product from a technical standpoint, and was a much more solid and stable experience from start to finish, and I still had a lot of fun with this version. I'll probably come back to Virgin's Aladdin more, and I respect the hell out of this game's ambition, but sometimes less is more. So as a fan, I would definitely pick Genesis, but I'm a reviewer and I can't let personal bias get in the way, so in the end, I have to acknowledge the Super Nintendo version as the winner.
God, man, I didn't think I'd ever have that hard a decision on picking a superior game. I mean, I could have copped out and just said it was a draw, but I don't think that would have went over well with people. But after really looking into it, it's easy to see why this debate goes on this strong after what, like 25 years? Because really, you can make up any valid reason for each game and why it's the superior version, and not be wrong for it. I mean, I was this close from picking the Genesis version, but really it just goes to show you how good these games are and why they get the praise that they do. If you haven't played either game yet, do yourself a favor and do so, because you're in for a good time. But I'm pretty much done here, so until then, you guys have a good day or night or whenever the hell you watch this, and I'll catch you later.